Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you all back. Of course, this is Luis Antonio Pichardo, the founder and executive director of DSTL Arts. And as usual, I am joined by my lovely co host, Abraham Jaramillo. Say what's up, Abraham.
Sup, sup.
And today we are very honored and privileged to be joined by Chicome Itzcuintli sorry,
Amatlapalli.
Amatlapalli. Um, my mistake. Uh, Born David Gramard Romero, who is a Chicano artist of mixed heritage, white U.S. American, and Huixarica, or Huichol, as some people might recognize the name, who was born in Los Angeles and currently living in Mexico City. They are a queer and two-spirit individual. Chicome Itzcuintli's work explores indigenous spirituality, decolonization, and the reclamation of ancestral memory through a contemporary lens. As a trained fire bearer and capitan within indigenous ceremonial traditions, Chicome Itcuintli holds a leadership role in Conchero Dance and ritual practice. Rooted in a detribalized experience, the result of historical processes that severed indigenous identity, their art speaks especially to those navigating their own return to ancestral roots, which I definitely appreciate. Through painting, writing, and ceremonial work, Chicome Itzcuintli bridges English, Spanish, and Nahuatl, weaving sacred storytelling with calls for cultural healing, resistance, and resurgence. Thank you for joining us today, Chicome Itzcuintli.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Since
like,
we have talked about your name already, again, first time I met you, it's great to have you here. But it just like did a like quick research because of the name, like Luis is getting stuck. I'm like, well, how do you say these things, right? So I just wanted to like look for what I found, right? Like what I found it means like Chicome is supposed to be seven, if I'm
Yeah.
correct. Then
Yes.
it's Quickly dog, right?
It's Squinty dog.
And then Amatlapalli, wing of
Yes.
a bird, right?
Yes.
And I hear it can be also of paper or
Yes. It
something
can be
like
a sheet
that.
of
So
paper.
yes,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's amazing. And of course, they have all little connotations of like the deities or the cultural meaning between those things. But those are the
Well,
things that I found, which I found really interesting.
I was born on the day Chicome Itzcuintli, seven dog. So like everybody would have their name of the day they were born. So it would always be a number and a sign. So that's Chicome Itcuintli and Amatlapalli. Then like when you do ceremony, you're given another name in ceremony, and so I
Just like the
chose the
Pope.
name. Yeah, I chose the name Amatlapalli because as an artist, I felt like bird wing and sheet of paper was a really poetic metaphor, and as an artist, I thought that was kind of perfect. And so like that name was like essentially my ceremonial name that I do in ceremony. And but I've kind of like struggled with my name for various reasons for a long time, but like for a while there I was like I'm getting less attacked and I'm also more used to it, but like I was getting really attacked online for how I look because I'm a very 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 white presenting Latino and person who does like indigenous ceremony, and people were accusing me of like cultural appropriation all the time. And there was a period where they were like hunting for me online and finding pictures of me. People wrote my mother, attacking my mother. So I reached a point where I was just kind of like, you know what, I don't want people to be able to find me, and so I decided to use my ceremonial name as my artist name, as a means of like just I don't know, like I wanted to. It's been an issue, and but I don't know. That was something that I did like 7 years ago, maybe 8, 9 years ago, and like more recently, I'm feeling like, I'm less bothered by it. It used to really like. I got attacked by some like influencers,
Mm.
so like they would have like hundreds of thousands of followers, and then I would get like 50 people writing me like all kinds of horrible messages every single day. And I was just like having a hard time dealing with that. And that's really what kind of why I did that. But that is my name. I mean, I was born on the day Chicome Itzcuintli,
Mhm.
seven dog, and Amatlapalli is in fact the name that I chose for myself and that I was given in ceremony.
Yeah, I think it's a big fine line of between appropriation and also taking claim of what you want it to become. 'Cause I feel like we're all people of this earth, and I think we're all learning, regardless where
Mhm.
we come from or how we look like. And I
Yeah.
think people get sometimes stuck. And I guess they have a point. I mean, there's a cultural, appropriation and colonialism that's being haunting us for the for a long time. But it's a difference between I'm just taking these for my good sake, or learning like with really good intentions, and
Mhm.
also going deep into the culture and really using and believing in what you're doing. So
Mhm.
it's interesting that you put that in. And just because I have that, like, between cultural appropriation of this, I had this question like, see, Wixárika is the name of the people, right? And their
Wirarika.
language, right? And then is how the indigenous people are called themselves, which means the people. But do you know what are they also called? Huichol? Is that one of those words that were mispronounced and then became the actual word? Or how
I
did
have
Huichol part become? Like, I just knew Huichol before hand, but I didn't know anything behind this story. It's like maybe somebody just tried to pronounce the other one and they end with Huichol, right? So
Wirarika
I
became
don't
Huichol.
know.
Maybe I have no idea where that word comes from. Yeah, I
Mhm.
just know that it's not the right. I mean, the word that
Yes.
one it's like Wirarika is like as a people, or Wira is like for an individual,
Mhm.
and Huichol is the name that comes from outside. I've never met a
Yes.
Wirarika person who's offended by the word Huichol.
Mhm.
So like I mean, it's not like, but that's not the word that's used for oneself. So my grandmother was Wirarika, and
Mhm.
so it's something that I feel like a strong connection to. But I never call myself Wirarika. I call myself of Wirarika descent.
Uh-huh.
Because like my grandmother was Wirarika, but she was taken away from her family and raised by like a mainstream Mexican family, like a mestizo family, and so in the generation of my grandmother, like language and culture was lost, but not racism. Like
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
story that's really weird how we're intertwined, because a lot of people start calling themselves such a tribe or whatever, but it's a lot of you know people being kidnapped in reality, right? And being
yeah,
taken or becoming part of the new culture that was dominant. This kind of the Spanish, then the English, and so on. So these many cultures are being appropriated or lost their knowledge, especially language wise. I
yeah,
always find it fascinating that most people that I feel like tribe names, they always go for like the people or the real people or things like that.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
fun that interesting that to see all these different people, different places calling themselves the people, right? Like
yeah.
it's an interesting, connection that we have.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yes.
but that's like where my work all comes from, because it's
Mhm.
like I feel like my mother is not like, I have blue eyes, but my mother is not. My mother is a woman of color, and I grew up with her speaking Spanish, and I feel like the racism that my grandmother experienced and my mother experienced, because of being my mother being the daughter of an indigenous woman, is something that formed my life, even though I personally didn't experience it because I look white. But nonetheless, it's like I wouldn't be who I am or live the way I do if it wasn't for that experience. And yet, there's no language, there's no culture, like the language and culture that I got is Mexican language and culture, like I said, Chicano, it's like like Spanish, but not Huira, So my work has been very much about how to find our way back towards a kind of a spiritual connection with our ancestors, which, for me, and that has not been via a Huira cultural experience, because it's like in the US, when I started like following this path a long time ago, I didn't know any Huira people. Like being Huira at the time was just like a name. Like I didn't know what it meant culturally to relate to that. Like I never met a Huira person other than my grandmother, and like however, there was a group of Aztec dancers near my house, so I started doing danza with them, and I didn't understand at the time that it was ceremony. I thought it was like ballet folklorico, So I was like, oh, I'm gonna like do exercise and wear awesome costumes and make Latino friends, because at the time most of the people I knew were white. My boyfriend was white, and I wanted to speak Spanish because I was only speaking Spanish with my mom. And so that's what I was looking for. And once I started doing it, I realized that it was actually ceremony, and I found it very fulfilling. I was like, oh, like this is a way for me to connect with my ancestors, which is a funny thing because my ancestors are not Nawa. Like I do a lot of work with Nawa culture, with Nawa language, but like It's like Aztec dance, which is a descendant of Conchero dance, is an indigenous dance to Mexico, and is turned into an intertribal tradition. And then what I would like to say beyond that is that Mesoamerica, which extends from Honduras and Nicaragua all the way to northern Mexico, perhaps even into like Texas and Arizona. It's like there are some arguments that Mesoamerica is broader. All of these cultures have very similar worldviews. So it's like, like as a, so like all of them will, believe in the necessity of like the world is a living thing, a living being, not a thing, and it requires it expends a lot of energy to give us life, so we have to give it back. It's like a reciprocal cycle. Almost every culture believes in that the mountains are hollow, the lords of rain live inside. Like there's a beautiful story, for example, that's told. I've read versions from the Maya world. It has to do with a young goddess of corn who grinds the corn and the metate, and she ends up grinding herself into masa. There's different versions of the story, but it's told by the Maya, by the Mixteco, and by the Huichol, by my own ancestors. So it's like these stories are told everywhere. So I feel like even if being a Conchero dancer, having come to a point where I manage fire and ceremony and I'm a capitan and all of that is a different tradition than the tradition my great-grandmother practiced. Nonetheless, the underlying story and spiritual beliefs are the same. And that's like kind of like how I understand what I do and justify what I do, and the way I understand sharing it with a broader community.
Definitely, it shows. Quick one, because I know you already talked about being a Conchero dancer. Can you tell us more about how does it look like, or what is the purpose or the story behind that dance? Since you're a little more involved for the people who are, watching us and also in audio. So can you just go a little more into detail into that? I'm curious.
Yeah. So, like Conchero dance is a kind of indigenous dance form from central Mexico. And so it's like from a big range of central Mexico. It ranges from el Estado de Mexico, la Ciudad de Mexico, Tlaxcala, it's in Puebla, in Guerrero, in Hidalgo. It's in a whole bunch of areas. And it encompasses a lot of different tribes. So there's Masawa Conchero dancers, there's Nahua Conchero dancers, there's like it encompasses a large area of central Mexico. And it's called Conchero dance because there's like a mandolin kind of thing, like a guitar made out of an armadillo shell. So like that's a part of the ceremony. And then we wear oyoyotes, which are like these seed pods that are rattles that we wear on our legs. So when we dance, like they rattle. And you'll see them like if you go to like a Cinco de Mayo parade or like basically anything that involves like Chicanos in the US, it's like doing like big ceremonial stuff. The santas come out and they wear like big feathers, and usually like the look is a little bit like the Hollywood fantasy of what an indigenous like Aztec person would have looked like. So the Conchero is where we're from, and it is an indigenous dance. It's very ancient. There's paintings of Conchero dancers that go all the way back to like the 18th century and 17th century. There's videos of Conchero dancers that are back to like the 1920s and 30s. Sergei Eisenstein has a video where Conchero dancers appear. And it became very Catholic. So it's like the movements that we do as Conchero dancers are completely indigenous. So it's like we have a specific way of dealing with fire and ceremony, like an incense burner, espoco copal. We salute the four directions. We do dances that give honor to pre-Hispanic teteo, like deities, but we dance for the Virgin of Guadalupe and the Señor de Chalma, and we, like lead the parade in las mañanitas, like for the La Virgen de Guadalupe, for things like that. So it's like, and Conchero dancers look at the floor. We do like velaciones. There's crucifixes on the velacion, in the altar. So it's very, very, very mixed. It's like it's a truly syncretic tradition that's indigenous and Catholic, and then the danzantes that most people are familiar with, they basically take in Conchero tradition and remove the Catholic stuff and try to preserve the indigenous stuff. So like it's something that's always evolving, and that's like the the ceremonial tradition that I pertain to. And a lot of what I do is like I go and dance for the Señora de Chalma and La Virgen de Guadalupe, and I dance in las mañanitas, and like, I do all of that stuff. But I also do ceremonies that are specifically for indigenous deities, and I am very interested in incorporating traditions that are from indigenous communities that are less syncretic and less Catholic. Basically all indigenous traditions look Catholic on the surface, but the stories that are told, like you may have an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe on the altar, and Jesus too, but then when they tell the story about who they are, they're not Catholic stories at all. It's like, they'll tell you like, oh, like, Jesus was stabbed in the side with the spear, and corn fell out, and he's like the God of the sun, and he's the son of the Virgin Mary, who lives in a cave inside the mountain, and like, so like these very elaborate stories will be told that involve Christian saints and Christian images on the altar, but the stories that are told are completely indigenous stories. I do not consider this syncretic. It's like when people talk about indigenous Mexican spirituality, in Mesoamerican spirituality, they call it syncretic, as though like it's 50-50, 50% indigenous, 50% European. And I think actually it's like 90% indigenous, and all that's really European is like the window dressing on the top, so that in 500 years of colonial experience, when like the colonial authorities came along, they're not going to like, tear down your altar and burn your house, because they see the Virgin of Guadalupe sitting on your altar, So it's like it creates a situation where you can tell the story that is the story that's true for your people, even if it looks on the surface like something that a European can accept.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing evolution of culture and how it adapts to, especially like a hierarchy of religions, right? Especially in Mexico, with the colonialism, how people got away with worshiping or continuing their own religion without being persecuted. Because definitely, it's a complex story, but it's an interesting one. So I suggest for any of our viewers and listeners to have the chance and go look at one of these dances. They're really amazing, and you look into the people. If you can stay longer, you can start asking questions of them, and sometimes they have programs that can teach you how to dance and what's behind it. So that's an amazing opportunity. And Luis, you have other things you want to say? Because I don't want to hog this mic.
And for that though, beyond that, I'd also like to say that like I'm not even sure how to. It's like if you're a Chicano person of indigenous descent, it's like, well, obviously the best thing is to connect with your own community. If you happen to know that your ancestors are Masawa or Zapotec or whatever, it's like, if there's a community that's willing to take you in and teach you, that's the best. That's the ideal. But if that doesn't exist, or if you don't know what your ancestry is, it's like you may look in the mirror and see an indigenous face looking back at you, but like, that doesn't mean that you know what your ancestry is. It's like danza is really the only way I know of that we can reconnect with our roots in a way that I think is authentic,
Yes, it's a lot unfortunate, like people don't have the access to contact people who they are, historical biologically from their own kind, like especially language wise. I was listening to like people doing the final recordings of the last elder who speaks such language. And it's sad, and it's just one of those things like, how do you reclaim things that are disappearing, right? It's like extinct species, right?
It's hard.
And so it is hard, and it's like one of the things I feel like if people have the chance to get involved, especially if they're from that community, be involved and being able to continue this culture, right? At their best, it's like nobody can like master all the languages, but I mean, one or two, or if they're able, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that all of the things that you're describing, Chicome, it's incredible that you've been able to find your sense of community and sense of belonging in something that is part of a deep and very rich ancestry that you hold. And I think that that's really important for all of us to remember that we're part of something that was once larger, and perhaps even something that has a different worldview than the standard cultural view of wherever it is that we might live. And One of the things that I remember when I first came across your artwork on, I believe it was on Twitter, with Mi Corazón Mexica and Neo Mexicanismos, I believe, was sharing your work.
Yeah.
And I loved the fact that you were bringing a very new and, I don't want to say updated or refreshed version of ancient traditions, but in some ways that is what it was, in a way that was almost updating the notion of what being Chicano is. And as a person who is, I guess, a Chicano by definition, um, I always would get frustrated in the past with how people typically identify as Chicano in this very like 1960s, 70s sort of framework. And I remember oftentimes arguing that no, our experience does continue to evolve and develop, and I can definitely see that reflected in your story. And I'm curious to hear when you first, aside from obviously growing up as a Chicano and living that authentic experience, when did you first kind of begin realizing that that was in fact a part of your story? And what moment, if there is a single moment, that really pushed you down this path that now you see yourself on, where you've explored beyond just the label of Chicano and now something that is clearly much bigger? Was there a moment, I guess, that marked that?
Growing as a kid, not really. Like, I feel like I just, thought of myself as Chicano and didn't really like question it particularly beyond that. And it wasn't until I started doing like danza, like, I've always been weird because it's like I'm mixed race also. So it's like being Chicano, but also like having white ancestry and looking like I look. And it's like, it's caused a lot of like being mixed is weird. This is like weird. But like when I started doing danza is when I feel like that started to change because it's like I feel like there's an element of, well, it's not just me, the zeitgeist has changed, because it's like when as a kid, it's like my mother, I was always aware that my grandmother was Native American. But like all that I really heard about that was like, tu abuela es India. Or yo soy India. Like that's the way, like that was the extent of it. It was like, sufrí un montón. I'm sorry, I'm speaking in Spanish. I suffered a lot because I'm Indian and like, and like people mistreated me because I'm Indian or they mistreated your grandmother because, and like, but there was never any like indication of what tribe she belonged to. Like, had they even said, I wouldn't have known what that meant, like, cause like I didn't know living in the LA area in the 80s, because I was a kid in the 80s. It's like I didn't really, like none of that meant I didn't know what it meant. I thought of myself being more Mexican, like I was like, oh, I'm Mexican and like, Mexican culture and Spanish. And that was how I identified myself. And my mother does not identify as indigenous, even if I mean, she is, it's like she suffered that I feel like the fact that she suffered that discrimination that was specifically laid at her feet because she's indigenous is the thing that caused my family to leave Mexico and go to the US as undocumented immigrants. And like they were like fleeing a terrible situation specifically because they were Native American. But I never like put that together. To me, it was like we are Latino, and there was something different in my mind. But I feel like through danza, it started to kind of like dawn on me that I'm like, wait a minute, like my mother, like being a person of color and being Mexican, this is not it's not just like a magical thing that just happened. It's like we're like like not me personally, but when I look at my mother or like the people in my family or a lot of us when we look in the mirror, what we're looking at is a Native American face looking back at us. And I feel like that's something that we as a community have been embracing over the last decade or decade and a half in a way that's more uh, pronounced and also more nuanced. Because that like 1970s, 60s version of Chicanidad or whatever is like, Aztec power and we're Aztecs or whatever, and like not really understanding what that means.
Yeah.
Or having any subtlety about like the anything behind it. And learning what I've been learning has, really since my 20s on, has led me down this path of like, I think that I was drawn to it because I was raised in a very old school Mexican Catholic way. It was very like mystical. And I lost that faith. But when I realized that it was still there, not the Catholic part, but like this mystical relationship, the spiritual relationship with the world could still exist with me through my heritage via an indigenous spirituality that really like expanded my mind and led me to study and also to like live. Because like one of the beautiful things about being an artist, I've lived on the sale of my work for 20 years and I can live anywhere I want to live, you know? So like I lived in an indigenous community, a Zapotec community in southern Mexico for like a year. And I invited a Huichol family, a Huirarica family to live with me for like 3 years. And, you know, so I've had a lot of these experiences where it's like I'm a Conchero dancer and I do that, but that's a very mixed. I feel like the forms, the way we move and the way we do ceremony is very Native American, but the things that we say are not. The things that we say are totally wrapped up in Catholicism, or I think that everything is influenced by like Western ideas in general, and lately by New Age stuff. There's a ton of New Age like faux Eastern spirituality that people are trying to ascribe to an indigenous root, and it's just not true. And it's all like mixed together. But like living in indigenous communities, it's like, I feel like I was able to see what a true indigenous spirituality actually looks like not just in terms of how it's practiced, but also in terms of what you believe. And all of that is something that I incorporate into my work as a way of like sharing it with my community again, and being able to say like, well, this is how we do what we do, but why do we do what we do as people who practice ceremony? And it's been very beautiful to be able to learn it, to plasmar it, like to express it in my work, and to share it with my community. It's been such a beautiful path that I feel like I've been gifted to be on. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, the answer itself, I think, is quite complicated just because of
Yeah,
the nature of identity and how we form identity. I mean,
yeah,
to use myself as an example, you know, my grandma is from Oaxaca, and I know for a fact that she grew up in a region that is primarily Zapotec, but
mhm,
she did not identify as Zapotec. She did not grow up within that particular tradition, because of exactly what you said, you know, the stigma associated with being indigenous, and therefore, you know, I look at her, you know, I have a picture of her behind me, a little tiny photo of the back there.
mhm,
And you look at her and you can totally say, like, oh yeah, you know, I remember people actually as a diss would be like, "Ah, pinche Oaxaquita," you know, like, and I
yeah.
would be there listening and I'd be like, well, fuck you, you know, like that's my grandma. Don't talk bad about my
Yeah,
um, and that was the environment that I grew up in San Diego.
yeah,
So, so I definitely relate with what you're saying, and you know, I do sometimes lament the fact that I don't have that specific connection to being Zapotec or to being
yeah,
Otomi, which is, you know, the tribe that my grandparents on my dad's side of the family would have potentially have belonged to, because I don't
yeah.
even know, because they don't even know.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
and
That's
so
where
like,
that's where danza comes in. It's like like we have all of these, we're so mixed. We have all of these roots that are so complex.
mhm.
And I feel like we're extremely lucky that there's this sort of intertribal tradition where we can try to reconnect with our roots, even if it's like a sideways process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things where people are mistaking is thinking it's a unique culture, you know. I think since the beginning of time, people are mixing, ideologies and practices, and especially with time, especially people moving more nowadays, and these big cultures taking over, it's not as easy as I am this, I am that. It's an evolving thing, and
Yeah.
it's a conflict, it's like a self conflict within people, like, who am I, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's a complex question, and I don't think it needs to be solved as this is me and I am this. This is
Yeah.
just me evolving, right? Me
Yeah.
learning what I can and being true to know that the identity that I want to create. Because also, you don't have to take like your roots and say this is just me. You can take whatever you want and start moving around and see what beats you. I don't think you have to be stuck in like oh, I should be this,
Yeah.
but be open to other people, because I hated that what Luis is saying, people diminishing other people because
Yeah.
they felt like, and purposefully, because of big cultures are trying to diminish these people so they can abuse them and they can make them like third class citizens and
Yeah.
all these horrible things. But at the end of the day, it's like, be open to learn and be, respectful for all these other cultures that are, around us. It's like next door is probably, somebody who's native. It's so many stories that are in these huge communities. With this, I wanted to ask you, I saw this piece you made, and also I think you have made in like the theme, a couple different paintings. But can you tell me more about this story behind the Maya well? So I know you have gone through that story.
You mean the oil painting, or which? I've done a
I
lot
think
of
I
like.
have. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I saw one that was uh, the paper one that's just like two colors, black and I think red or blue or something like that.
Oh,
And
okay.
you also
Yeah.
did a painting. But can you tell us
Yeah.
more of the story,
Well,
and perhaps one of those pieces might as well?
Mayahuel is the goddess of the maguey, which is the plant that tequila and pulque and mezcal comes from. And so my Calpuli, the group of danzantes that I am the capitán of, that I belong to, we are dedicated to Maya Hue. So she's also La Virgen de los Remedios here in Mexico. Like La Virgen de los Remedios is a virgin, the Virgin Mary who appeared on top of a maguey plant, and so she has an ancient shrine here in Mexico City. And so we go and dance at the shrine of La Virgen de los Remedios every year, and we also go to Tecuaque, which is a pre-Hispanic site in the state of Tlaxcala, where there's a pyramid dedicated to Mayahuel. So like, my thing is all about like, well, it's all syncretic, so it's like the Virgin of the Virgin of Los Remedios is Mayahuel. Like when I go there, I'm not like particularly thinking about the Virgin Mary or the mother of Jesus, or like I'm not thinking about that at all. When I go there, I'm thinking about Mayahuel and what she means to us. So it's like, to describe her as really like a microcosm of everything in terms of indigenous spirituality. I'm with my hair so much because it's like I'm like it's falling in my face, but like she so a god of a thing is the same as the thing in indigenous spirituality. So it's like Poseidon, for example, is the god of the sea, and he rules the sea, and he can make the sea do what he wants. But the sea he's not the sea. It's like he has mastery over the sea, but he's not the sea. He's separate from the sea. But in indigenous spirituality, the Teot, or the god of a given thing, is the same as the thing itself. So Mayahuel is the goddess, in quotes, of the maguey, but she also is the maguey. So to get tequila or mezcal or pulque, you have to kill the plant. It's like you cut the flower before it grows. It has this enormous flower, and the sap that would have fed the flower flows into the heart of the plant, and you ferment that, and that's the alcohol that you drink. So the story of Mayahuel is a story basically in which she's killed and sacrificed. Like she chooses to die for the sake of humanity. And that's like where the story about the reciprocity comes in, where it's like Mayahuel provides us with alcohol, but she also provides the entire plant is useful. So in the past, like this doesn't happen anymore, but in the past, the leaves could be used to roof your house. Like you could use them to make the roof of your house. You could shred the leaves and weave them into cloth. It has needles on the ends of the leaves that you could sew with. Um, it has worms that live in the leaves that you could eat. They still eat those actually. So like there's no, like by the time you're done, the entire plant has been consumed, and most of the plant served the lower classes. Like rich people didn't roof their houses with maguey leaves, and they didn't wear cloth made out of maguey cloth either because it was like scratchy. They wore cotton. So she's like the mother of the humble and the poor. And to do that, she dies to give us that. And she provides the means of paying that debt. So it's like she gives that to us out of love and abundance. But the thorns are also used to do sacrifice. So it's like you use the thorns to to pierce your tongue or your ear or your fingertip or scratch your shins or your penis, and you offer this blood to the Teteo, to all of them, and to her. And that blood is part of that debt payment. So it's like when we do ceremony, the Teteo require ceremony. They require the smoke of copal, they require our sacred steps, they require our dance and our sacrifice, they require our blood. And animal sacrifice is very common in, I mean, it's not just common, it's like necessary in indigenous communities throughout Mesoamerica, because that blood is part of what, that it has a spiritual substance, this force in it, that like which is basically like the milk of the plant, which becomes pulque, is like her blood that she's giving us, that gives us that nutritional benefit, that gives us the ability to like, like drink it at a party, have fun with your friends, have the bravery to flirt with that boy or girl, it gives us like the bravery to go to battle. Warriors drink it before battle. Like it gives us all of these like abilities, and among which is just to have fun. And my abuel thought that it was worth it for her to die for our sake, even if it's just so that we can enjoy life, and so we're required to pay that debt back. My abuel is like one aspect of this. Obviously, the most important of them all is corn. Like the corn dies. Like the plant is not just a plant. The plant is a living being who suffers when we cut off the flower and scrape the leaves and collect her sap, and the corn suffers when we grind it on the metate and make a masa to make the tortilla, so that, which is the staff of life. We can't live without tortillas. So it's like they suffer for our sake. They're not just vegetables. They're like living beings with agency and will. Like some people say that like the pre-Hispanic people, the Aztecs, didn't have gods, and that's not true. It's like they're not gods in the European sense, but they do have agency, they have will, they act on our behalf, they desire things for us, they desire things from us, and that's what ceremony is all about, and that's what my artwork is about. Like my artwork explores these stories, it explores the meaning of the sacrifice of my abuel, it explores like what we owe my abuel, and like I think the last thing I would like to say about that is that when I started doing all of this, it had to do with, I think, an exotic something. I was like drawn by the smoke of copal, by the beautiful regalia, by the feathers, by this, an escape. It's like ceremony is this beautiful space where I feel like I'm not living my normal everyday modern life. But over time, it has become something where I feel like indigenous spirituality is about, more than anything else, our relationship to the world that we live in, which requires balance. Like if we can't balance the life that we're in with the Teteo, they're literally going to wipe us out. Like they cannot give us what we need if we don't give to them. And living in the era of global warming, I feel like indigenous spirituality is necessary to the health of the planet that we live on, to understand that the world isn't a thing that you can exploit. Like the earth is not a thing that we can exploit. She's a being who loves us and whom we need to love back.
Yeah, I love that. And it's fascinating that we have all these gods that we're talking about, and at the same time, they were not just represented as a thing, but also the context that people is using them. How a thing is connected to the humans that are utilizing it, and then by that creating that respect of I have to take care of these because it's giving me so much, and that's fascinating. I noticed that many of these paintings or illustrations, pre-modern time, and at this time, I guess, they have their own particular, dress codes or significant like attire they use. How would you say, like, especially in your paintings, what is that thing that's recognizable from Maya Well? What's this thing? It's like a hairdress, or what's
You chose
what's
the
the
most
thing?
difficult of them all. Maya Well has basically nothing that's recognizable. Like almost all of the Teteo, the gods, have all of these symbols that are very specific to them. The only one that she has that's specific to her is the plant itself. So she's almost always going to appear in or near or on a maguey, like that, or the flower will be in her headdress. Like that's very specific to her. But when she appears in artwork, she might have the regalia of the goddess of water. She might have the regalia of the of the teot of sexual. I'm gonna stop using the word god or goddess because they're not the right word. So I'm gonna use the word teot or teteo. She might be the in the regalia of the teot of water, of sexuality, of like the sun, of all kinds of things. And like basically it's like each element of her, like if she's dressed in the, if she's standing on a maguey, so you know she's Mayawed, but she's wearing the regalia of the teot of water, is basically emphasizing her role as a giver of this precious liquid, like that runs through her veins, and that it's the pulque. So like the pulque becomes associated with water as this life-giving liquid that, that sustains us, or she's associated with the teot of sexuality. That's because they're telling us that obviously alcohol and sex are very related. She's she's deeply, intimately related to fertility and life giving. Like there's she said to have 400 breasts. So it's like depending on the regalia that she's wearing, they're basically choosing to emphasize a specific aspect of who she is.
So it's really versatile, I guess.
It is, but that's like part of the way. That's one of the ways that, like, the reason, like, the word god or goddess, I think, is not a very good word to use to describe indigenous spirituality. And that's also because, like, if you think of, to go back to Poseidon, it's like Poseidon is an individual. He is one being who rules the sea, and like, say, Venus rules love, and Apollo rules the sun, and they're individuals who exist outside of the thing that they rule, and they are, like, they're unique. Indigenous spirituality does not view the world on those terms. Everything that exists is a manifestation of one single thing. And that thing is teot, this energy, this life force. This is more than a life force. It's like a force that encompasses the entire universe. We are manifestations that are just like rising out of teot and existing for a minute and then falling back into it. And the teot, the gods, are they don't have individuality in that sense. So it's like she exists as like a spiritual force out there in the world somewhere in this goddess-like way, Mayawel, who has agency and will and all that. And she's the plant at the same time. And she's not just one plant, she's every plant. She's every single Maguey plant that ever lived or will ever live. She's all of them at once. And so like the teot, there's a way of thinking of them where they're not really individuals. They're like when their masks they're like collections of qualities and abilities, and so they're always sharing with each other. So like another way to think of it is like our nawali. So like we all, human beings, all have nawali, which are like, can be like very badly described as a spirit animal, right? So we all have these spirit animals. And the common thing for people to be like, oh, like, I saw my spirit animal in like a dream and I am a jaguar. But that's not the way you would actually describe it. But you wouldn't say, I have a jaguar as my spirit animal. You would say, I am a jaguar. Like, because it's like you and that jaguar are not two different beings. It's not your pet. It's not like at the Hunger Games, or not the Hunger Games, like the Golden Compass, but like where they have those like their little like beings, like you are them. So it's like you have a soul in your head called your tonali. And when you're awake, your nawal, your spirit animal, is asleep in the mountain or in the wild place. And when you fall asleep, your tonal leaves your head and travels to the other world, to this other part of our world, to the mountain, and enters the body of your nawal, and your nawal wakes up. And what you see while you're sleeping is what your nawal is experiencing while it's awake. So it's like you can't say that your nawal is like separate from you. It is you. But it's like you, we, I, and the natural world are linked via our nawal. And it's the same with the teteo. Like she somehow exists in some astral plane as like Mayawel, but she's also the plant at the same time. And she's every plant that ever lived. She dies and is reborn. So it's like I don't remember what the point of the question was. I got carried away. I have a habit of doing that. But like
no, that's excellent. That's excellent. So,
yeah.
Because I was just asking, like, because I know so many different like gods, right? In this context, have their own unique, way of being represented, especially in illustrations. And you just answer perfect, like unique, way of she's, basically all these things. The only thing that's you have to look for when you're trying to see who she is, it's basically that she's next to the plant or has the flower on top of her. Yeah. and then she can have all these different things going on.
I really appreciate everything that you're sharing about your experience, and I think related to your artwork, there's been several posts that I saw that you've done in the past and even recently that were part of your process for developing your paintings. One of them, most recently, was the painting of the hand and the dealt. I think of like it was gambling and multiple like
Yeah.
experiences. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your process for developing these works of art. Where do you find the inspiration, number one, and what are the steps that you take, especially since you do work in oil painting? I mean, to me, I've only ever worked in acrylic and watercolor. Oil just seems very overwhelming. So I'd like to hear your take on oil painting.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I feel like I would say that like I will never lack for inspiration. Like I don't have artist block. I will never lack for inspiration. Like my paintings are based on stories that are like part of our heritage and culture, and there's just so many that this lifetime will not be enough to paint all of the stories I would like to paint. And so like everything comes from that, like on some level. So it's like I want to paint the different Tateo, I want to paint sacred narratives, I want to paint all of these, so I spend a lot of time thinking about like what story I particularly want to paint or how I want to represent a particular, Tateo. That painting in particular you're talking about with a hand is inspired by colonial painting. There's like a painting of the Sacred Hand of Jesus. That's like I love colonial art from Mexico. I think it's just like surreal and extremely beautiful. And it's like I'm not in love with what they're saying. Like I could really care less about the wounds of Jesus and things like that. But I love the aesthetic and the way they're painted. I think they're extremely beautiful. So that particular painting was inspired by a colonial tradition where they would paint the hand of Jesus with the wound, and the blood is pouring out of it and it's feeding the sacred lambs. And I don't know, there's this whole thing going on. And so in indigenous tradition, the Tonaleque, who are the gods of pleasure, are also the gods of the hand. And in fact, they have a hand painted on their mouth. And they're the gods of everything that has to do with the hand. So it's like they're gods of gambling, of art, music, reading the tonalama, sex, like they have a bunch of different qualities to them. And so I thought that the hand was a perfect way to represent the tonaleque. There's 5 tonaleque because we have 5 fingers in our hands. So in the painting, it's like there's a huge hand in the middle, and then there's a tonaleque floating above each finger. And then the hand itself is covered with tattoos or body paint that describes the things that the tonaleque rule. So that's like the kind of a base of what the painting is. And then the way I paint them is like everything is based on models and photos. So it's like I took a photo of the hand of my friend, and another different friend posed for the tonaleque, and then I made a drawing based on like a study for what it was going to look like based on that. And then I make a really elaborate drawing, and then I paint it in oil. And then I make a really elaborate drawing where the hand is drawn in ink, and I draw all of the glyphs all over the hand, and then I trace that onto the painting. Well, I don't trace it, but I transfer it onto the painting, and then I paint that in oil. And like, it's just like this long process. It's a very like, I went to a school that was very traditional, and so I learned like a kind of classical technique, and I love to paint in oil. It's like I'm really into it. So it's like for me, it's like. It is sort of intimidating, but also like I'm still a little intimidated by it. But I'm also like, I just love the way the paint feels when I'm moving it. I love the colors, and like you can get a richness of color that you can't any other way. And I love being an artist, and I feel like being an artist is a conversation with other people who are artists who are alive today and working, but also with artists who are dead and who have been dead for a long time. So like I'll go to a museum and see a painting by Rembrandt or Caravaggio or, Manet. and I feel like I'm deeply inspired by what they do. I copy them. I like, learn from them, and I answer them. I feel like when I'm making a work of art, I'm in a conversation with them, and other artists in the future will be in a conversation with me. I hope if I'm good enough for other artists to care that I've lived it all, and and oil paint is a way for me to do that, where I feel like I look at an oil painting by Manet, or it's like the technique of classical European art, and I just love to do it, in part because I feel like I'm connected to that tradition, which is funny because, like, on the one hand, I'm all about indigenous spirituality and indigenous stories, but I don't deny the fact that I'm mixed, that we're all mixed on some level. Like, even if we're not genetically, we are culturally, and I feel like embracing the beautiful elements of that other side of who we are is also worthy. It's like, I love European art. I love it. And but I feel like the Europeans looked at our heritage as people of indigenous descent from here, from Mesoamerica, and they didn't respect us or have interest in us or like what we have to say. But I feel like, what would have happened had the Europeans come to the New World in a spirit of curiosity, and indigenous people, like, I can only imagine like what it would have felt like to be somebody from, an indigenous person in 1490 and see, the work of the Europeans, and to incorporate perspective into their work. It's like, I feel like there was something beautiful happening on both sides, but only one side there wasn't any interest in or ability to create a dialogue in a way that would have been fruitful for the indigenous people, like, and that's something that I think about in my work too. It's like, I love telling paintings in a European style, in a European manner, but that treat indigenous spirituality as something that's worthy of that kind of treatment, and it's like, and beyond that, I also feel like, as a kid, we would go to Mexico and I would go to colonial churches and see this artwork in the churches. And for me, that also like turned into a kind of like a spiritual language. It's like, when I look at it, it makes me feel spiritual, whatever that means, like, it feels like what I felt as a kid when I would look at the picture of that painting of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And so when I make those paintings in that style now, but telling indigenous stories, I feel like I'm yoking that that power, that power that the Catholic Church instilled in us over time, but in giving it to a different narrative. I do that with a lot of my work in different ways.
Yeah, and that's actually something that really attracted me to your work from the beginning, was that level of appreciation and, in some ways, almost respect and honoring of our ancient traditions through that medium of a more realistic or European, quote unquote, form of art. And I really appreciated that. And I'm kind of curious, do you find yourself working more often in traditional medium, or do you also work in digital medium? And what are some of the challenges that you find in working in other mediums outside of your, like, oil paintings, as an example?
I am extremely old-fashioned, and I don't do anything digitally at all. So I paint in watercolor, uh, oil, a little bit in acrylic, but not that. But no, I do work in acrylic, very elaborate paintings. I forgot. On the reverse side of plexiglass with anyway, I make like collages with acrylic.
Mhm.
I do textiles. I've done ceramics. I do a lot of work with marker and ink on paper. That's like, for me, that counts as modern.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, everything is scanned in, and a lot of it gets a little bit manipulated afterwards. So like, in particular, if it's going to become a product like a tarot card or something like that. But for the most part, like, all I really do is like, everything is done by hand. And like, I'm 50, like, I feel like I'm of an age where, when I was in college, like, I wasn't taught how to do digital techniques, and I've just never been interested in it, to be honest. It's like, I feel like there's a beauty to my hand moving across a piece of paper. There's a beauty to the piece of paper itself, because there's nothing wrong with doing artwork digitally,
Yeah.
but there's no original. Like, you can print a million and they're all the same, whereas when you make a work of art by hand, that original has a mystique. It has like a soul
Yeah.
that can only exist in it because I put it there when I made it. and that can never happen when you print something, so like I feel like there's that also, and so that's something that for me is important as an artist. So it's like I don't know, like but yeah, I don't do anything digitally.
Yeah, so you have a lot of paintings laying around.
Oh my
Storage
god, the
room.
room is filled with artwork by me.
Yeah,
There are
that's the
thousands
only
of
downside of like physical work is space wise. But it's yeah, definitely has that kind of
yeah,
mystique of having an object that's
yeah,
living beyond right. The internet
yeah,
kind of does its
yeah.
magic, but it's not the same.
Yeah, yeah, it's magic, but it's not the same.
And talking
And,
about all
and there are
these
ways in which
paintings,
I
go
really
for
think about it. It's like I'm painting a tonalama, like the so-called Aztec calendar, and it's something where I feel like I'm going to start giving classes with it. I want to print it. I want to like sell it. I want it to be part of the like to be part of our community. And a tonalama is like it's like it hasn't existed in 500 years. Like no culture was able to keep it up, not in terms of the actual object. There have been cultures that have maintained a tradition orally, so they, like, but not as a physical object because I just couldn't survive the colonial age. But like in the pre-Hispanic era, it was like a being. It was like a living being with a soul, and that's like one of the many things that I ponder, where it's like when you paint it by hand, and in particular in the past, where it's like I am positive that like from the moment of collecting the tree that you're going to make the paper out of, to mixing the paint, to painting it, the whole entire process would have involved ceremony, fasting, smoking the paper with smoke copal, and then you have this object that you ensoul and you bring to life through ceremony, and like all of that happens as a process of like a physical thing made by hand in the world. And what does it mean when I print it in a printer with synthetic inks? And like, is it alive? Like, can you bring it to life through ceremony? Like, what, like those are a lot of the things that I wonder about in terms of like indigenous spirituality versus living in the modern world, and all of these ways where the things that we do are not really, they're not they don't sync with an indigenous worldview, but that's how we're living. So like, how do you bring these things together? Like that's something that I wonder about quite a bit. Like there's like a very simple example, for example, is I was castigated for the way I light my incense burner. Because like the way we're taught as concheros is like there's a whole process where we put our ocote in there and we light it and we give it intention. There's a whole process. It's a ceremonial. But I met a Nahua like shaman, and in his community, the only way to light an incense burner is to take the fire out of the fire in the hearth in the middle of your home. And if the fire in your incense burner doesn't come from that hearth, it's not a real. You can't do ceremony with it. And he criticized me because I don't do that. And then I was just kind of like, I live in a wood house in the middle of a big city, and I don't have a open fire pit in the middle of my home with a fire burner.
That's practical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things like that where I'm just like, I appreciate what you're saying, but like, how do I do that? Like, am I gonna go sacrifice a chicken in the park by my house when I do ceremony? Like, I don't think so. Like, you criticize me because I don't sacrifice animals in ceremony. It's like there are things where it's like, how do you pull these things together? I don't know.
That kind of brings me like a little bit of a question that it's kind of complex, but I wanted to ask you because of the type of work you do. Do you consider your work as religious act, or historic, or personal expression, or a tribute to the culture?
Yes.
I thought so. I thought so. Right?
Yeah, it's all of those
And just
things.
by listening to you, I'm like, yep, this is pretty much what I was thinking.
Different pieces have different intentions. I do pieces that are never going to be for sale, that are going to be taken and left at a sacred site as an offering. I do pieces that are meant for galleries, that are, I have a process that's different for different pieces that I do. So it's like I have paper that I've blessed with my blood that I offered with maguey thorns, and that I smoked in ceremony, and that like I've taken to sacred spots. And those papers I mark, and I only paint the teteo, like gods and sacred artwork on them. And then I have other paintings that I do that don't have that intention, and I use whatever normal paper I have. I put on elements of regalia when I make paintings of the teteo, because I feel like wearing like my red cinta, like makes me, I'm conscious that I'm wearing it the whole time I'm painting, and it helps me to feel like I'm focusing on them. And I ask permission before I paint it. And I'm like, I want to be guided. I want to have like guide my intuition to paint you the way you want to be represented, so I feel like but it depends on what I'm doing, because I make artwork that's meant for galleries, that's meant for sale from the day I conceive it, and that work is not sacred. And then I do paintings that are completely sacred and will never be sold. It may never even be seen by anybody. That I just make them so that I can leave it as an offering. And those are two different extremes. But like my work of Arca, like it encompasses that entire range.
Yeah, I like that you have your focus and you know where things are going, and have a different approach to different outcomes. So that's something that we always try to teach our students, like have an ability to see what it's for, and guide your energy or your process or the way you want to work into that kind of outcome. And just by that, I also saw this painting of a woman feeding a baby. I think it's really beautiful the way you depict such an intimate moment, and the love of a mother for their babies, right?
Thank
and
you.
I wanted to ask you if you have any you have noticed difference in the historic sex roles and the sex roles of today in indigenous communities or cultures.
Yes. Okay, so that's like one of those areas where I also feel like this, like it's like a difficult thing to talk about, I think, but it's like, oh no, yeah, well, no, I mean in the sense of like where I was saying earlier, like, when I was talking about like the brick that's printed and can you install it and bring it to life or whatever, or sacrificing the chicken, it's like I was berated for not sacrificing animals in ceremony by an indigenous teacher, like not a Conchero dancer, not a, like an actual indigenous person from an indigenous community. And that's, like, it's like, indigenous cultures in general are very patriarchal. That's not to say that they all have been historically or, but like as far, at least modern indigenous cultures almost everywhere are pretty patriarchal. That it's arguable whether that's because of Catholic, Christian 500 years of colonialism, or if that's how they were before. The Mexica were definitely patriarchal, and so I think that there's a wide range, but like it's that place where it's like coming to it from the outside. I mean, it's our heritage, but we were raised in a, most of the people who are listening to this, I'm assuming, were raised in a less indigenous and more mainstream Mexican Chicano kind of way or whatever. And there are things about that that are not bad. It's like I feel like the way I've been, able to embrace my queer identity over time, feminism, great. That's a great thing. There's a lot of things that are like really powerful, but that have emerged from Western culture that I think are there to be embraced, and like, I don't think we really have it's like there's this notion of decolonizing ourselves that's very fashionable and popular, and people are like using it all the time and saying like, oh, it's like my work decolonizes, and I said it in my artist statement that you read, I think, but as beautiful as the idea is, and as worthy a goal as it is to attempt, it can never really be achieved. It can only be attempted, because there's just too many things that may be good, but that we don't know how to achieve. Like those things that I was talking about in terms of like living in a contemporary world where it's, it's like if you're now a person and you want to like properly light your incense burner, well, how do you do that if you live in a little apartment where, you don't have like your 3 hearthstones in the middle, it's like you can't. Or on the other side, it's like maybe you're I don't know, tricky, or and like the tricky, modern tricky people, like it's normal to have like a bunch of wives and one husband. Like that doesn't seem great to me. So maybe if you're like a Triqui Chicano living in the US, it's like maybe that's something that you're not really wanting to embrace about your heritage. But that doesn't mean that Triqui spirituality isn't deeply profound and moving, and that there aren't elements of Triqui culture that aren't completely beautiful. But but our heritage involves a lot of things that are not so great. And I don't think that's bad exactly, because like there's a tendency to like extol our ancestors to this point where it strips them of their humanity. I feel like mistakes on an individual level and on a cultural level is human. Like to pretend that our ancestors are perfect and that they did everything perfectly is to put them on a pedestal so high that A, we're never going to be able to achieve it, even if they were like that, and B, is to deny that they were human. And I feel like that these ideas about patriarchy and feminism and like the elements of Western culture that I think are good are things to be embraced, and the elements of indigenous culture that are good and that speak to us are the things that we should embrace. And I feel like decolonizing ourselves is important. In particular, like I was saying earlier about environmental issues, it's like Western culture is deeply, heinously, horribly corrupt and wrong and destructive when it comes to the vision of the natural world. Like, terrible. It's like the worst thing that the Western culture could possibly have ever done, and they're bringing the entire planet to ruin. So like there are areas where I feel like there's no arguing with the horrors of Western culture. Capitalism is another one. Oh my God, like the worst. But like and there's a lot to learn from indigenous cultures to address those evils, those frankly evils of Western culture. But there are other things that are beautiful in terms of human rights, feminism, queer rights, those kinds of things, and I'm like, we should embrace that because some of those have not always been present in indigenous culture.
Yeah, that's what I found interesting, that you are saying basically to not romanticize. I think many people end up in that kind of rabbit hole, like, oh,
Yeah.
let me romanticize my past or my ancestry or my old cultures. And I
Yeah.
like that you mentioned they're human, right? Meaning,
Yeah.
not in a good way, meaning we're fucked up in many different ways,
Yeah.
even though we have good things, right? It's a
Yeah.
good way to view things, saying, and that's where I say, like, I like that kind of evolution of culture, you take what you think it's best and you don't reuse what doesn't work. Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially in terms of the environment, human rights, you have to be really open your eyes, see what's good, right? It's interesting. And I found that, like, how do you deal with the past and the present, that's the best way. Use your judgment and try to make something better.
Yeah, I feel like that too.
Yeah. And I definitely feel the same in the sense of, it is important that we evolve and that we move beyond just, the tenets of old and the tenets of modern day. There is going to be a brighter future if we can somehow merge the best of all worlds. And I really appreciate your sentiment in that. And actually, one of the things that I've noticed in your practice that I think encapsulates that really well is your tarot card deck that you've developed. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what inspired you to create a Mexica tarot deck, essentially. And I know also that you have your upcoming workshop. You can obviously let us know about what that's going to be like.
Thank you. Yes. So I painted a Mexica indigenous now tarot deck. I did it partly because, like, years and years and years ago, I lived in San Francisco, and there was a botanica across the street from my house, and there were people going in there getting their tarot read. It was all Latino. I lived in the Mission, and the tarot deck that she had at the window was a Waite Rider Smith tarot deck, which is like a bunch of white people, like princes with blonde hair and things like that. And I remember even then, when I was like 19, I would look at it and be like, that's so weird. Like I mean, I get it, I understand it, but it's also like I don't see myself reflected in that tarot deck, and so like I thought about it for a long time. Years and years and years later, I decided I wanted to paint the tonalama, like the so-called Aztec calendar, and I didn't know how to go out doing that. It's extremely difficult because no one's painted it in 500 years, and I decided that painting a tarot deck was the way to I went to art school. I learned like theory, you know, it was like a very like, you know, conventional like way of thinking about being an artist, and painting a tarot deck is totally different. It's like a different way of approaching art. So I thought, or painting a tonalama. So I decided to paint the tarot deck as a exercise in like, how do I approach art not through the viewpoint of an individual, like in terms of like me expressing myself, but in terms of me approaching ancient symbols, both European and indigenous, and making those meaningful for a community. You know, like I felt like it was a very different way about thinking about being an artist. Like ideally, usually when you go to a gallery and see a work of art hanging on the wall, you're looking at the personality and individuality and the message that the artist wants to give you. But whereas when you read a tarot deck, it's like the artist disappears. Like the artist doesn't really matter. What matters is like the relationship you have with that deck, you know? So like that's what I wanted to explore. And it's a very ironic project because tarot obviously has zero to do with indigenous spirituality or culture, but it is something that's a part of Chicano culture and Mexican culture today. And I wanted to see my mother and my grandmother reflected in that tarot deck. I wanted to look at it and see them there, and so that's what I did.
Excellent. And the workshop that you have coming up, I know that it's happening in Mexico City, but what does that entail? And I did actually see a question on your Instagram asking if it was going to ever be on Zoom. Is that a possibility?
It is a possibility. For now, it won't be. I've never actually given a course on the Tonalama before, so I don't want to put it on Zoom until I know what I'm doing. So these first, you know, my apologies to the people who are going to take the course and who are listening to this, but you're kind of like my guinea pigs to see how it goes. But like, yes. However, like I will give courses about the tarot in the future, but that's not really where my heart is. I've been working on the Tonalama, and I feel like that's really where I want to put my energy. I'm working on a book to interpret it. I'm making a dictionary of glyphs. I have I'm doing all of this work on the Tonalama. I thought I was going to be done like a year ago, and now I'm like, it'll be done in a year from now, but I really truly think it will be done in like a year from now. I'm like getting close. I can feel it. So like that's like where I'm working towards, is like I want my dream is that someday when people see each other, they're like, oh, like, what sign are you? And like, oh, I'm an Aries. Oh, I could see that. Instead, they're going to be like, when you meet, you're going to be like, what sign are you? And you're going to say, oh, I'm 7 Jaguar. And I'm going to be like, oh my God, I could totally tell. I knew it. And that'll be the astrological conversation between Chicanos and Mexicans. It's going to happen. I know it.
I mean, I wear my Nahual on my arm.
Amazing. I love that.
So yeah, I definitely I want to be a part of that.
It's coming. It's in the works.
Awesome.
And just because we're on the subject, is there a website or events that you want to talk about, promote, so we can plaster it on the YouTube part, and guide people towards places they can support you, or events that are coming?
Yes. I have my Etsy page. That's where almost everything is for sale. So like, please check that out. I have like regalia, paintings, prints, like all kinds of stuff, like the tarot deck.
There you go, Luis.
Yeah, and at the moment it's not up, but I'm going to open a Kickstarter pretty soon. I'm making another version of the tarot deck that's going to be devoted just to women. So it'll be nothing but goddesses and subjects that have to do with femininity and women. So that'll be up there too. But I'm most active on Instagram. So if you look up Mi Corazón Mexica on Instagram, I try to post every day. I don't always make it, but like I try. And a lot of my posts are educational. It's like I talk about the meaning of the teteo, like my paintings, the symbolism, I try to make my Instagram, it's about sharing my work, but it's also about educating.
Excellent. Yeah, I highly recommend the Instagram. And are you still active on X or Twitter or whatever?
I'm not. I was so disgusted by Elon Musk that I just couldn't. But I may go back. I don't know. It's like if like not doing it feels like ridiculous.
I think the next one is Blue Sky or something like that. It's the new
I'm
one.
on Blue Sky.
Yeah.
I'm on TikTok. I'm on Threads. and I'm on Instagram. And I haven't posted anything on X for months because I just couldn't handle Musk. But
Yeah,
like,
I'm out of that place.
yeah, I know. But like, I don't know. I may start posting stuff there again.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I honestly have not really been on there very much. But like I said in the beginning, that was actually how I first learned about your work. And I started following you there. And then I later started following you on Instagram as well. So
On the streets,
yeah.
everywhere.
God, no.
Instagram is the best because like Instagram, I basically make all my content for Instagram, and then I put it elsewhere if it fits.
Mhm.
So like X is hard anyway because it's like I have to break. It's like a lot of work to do something educational there.
Right.
And like TikTok, my TikTok is basically just Spanish. Like I don't do it in English. So like if you're an English speaker and you want to like follow my work and see what I do, Instagram is definitely the place where I put everything.
Para español, TikTok.
Para español, TikTok.
See you on TikTok.
Uh-huh.
Excellent. And I have one question also that I like asking. It's like, do you have an artist that you currently like or that you sometimes go back to that you want to talk about? It can be a musician, it can be a painter, it can be a sculpture, anyone that you want to mention, give it a shout out.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, if you like my work, you might like the work of Areus. He's a Mexican artist. He's Masawa, and he's almost the only artist I know who does artwork that deals with indigenous spirituality in a way that's like my work is like I learned how to read the glyphs. I know what all I know. Like my work is very like faithful to pre-Hispanic work, to the pre-Hispanic language, and his is too. And he's the only artist I know who does that. Like his work is really beautiful. So and he's indigenous. He's Masawa. So like you might check him out. He's also very, very active on Instagram. His name is Areus.
Excellent.
He's also a friend.
Check it out.
That's always good, when you can feel confident in saying like, yeah, my friend inspires me. Like that's
Yeah. He's really good. You'll like his work.
awesome.
Excellent. I'll put it on the list.
I haven't already. And I guess the only other thing that I would have for you, the last question that I have for you is for the artists out there who do follow our podcast. And
I want to say, can I say one more recommendation? I just had
Yeah, bring it.
It's music. La Bruja de Texcoco.
La Bruja de Texcoco.
You should check out La Bruja de Texcoco. La Bruja de Texcoco is gender fluid, like ridiculously fabulous. Like their music is very like traditional sounding music, but it pulls in a lot of queer themes. Like they're amazing. I am such a fan of La Bruja de Texcoco. So I feel like like it's because like the queer side of things, indigenous, like just beautiful, like La Bruja de Texcoco.
Yes, I'll definitely check.
Another one on the list.
Yeah.
Bring it.
Well, it's kind of like Los Cogelones. Like I really like the music of Los Cogelones because they do incorporate a lot of Nahuatl in their.
I don't know
traditional
them. I need
sounds.
to like check them out. Los
Oh, yeah.
Cogelones.
Los Cogelones, yeah.
Okay.
I believe they're from Nesa, so
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
They're my neighbors.
yeah.
Black Ayer told me about him, and because they were gonna be in a place that I hang out over here. And so, they were gonna be there. I was like, I don't know. Then so I wasn't like aware until later. Like, oh, you should have told me. I'm like, huh? I didn't know until now.
Los Cogelones are a bit more like on the punk rock side, like
Okay.
a little bit heavier on the like hardcore punk, but really
I'll check
cool,
them out.
and I really enjoy their music too. But yeah, I guess like I was saying, my last question for you was, do you have any words of wisdom for the artist out there that is still trying to find their identity and their voice and is maybe looking at exploring their indigeneity in the way that you did? Do you have any words that you'd like to share with them beyond what you've already mentioned?
I would say that it's an extremely rewarding path. I think it's difficult and requires constant invention and self-invention, and it also requires a lot of humility and listening, because the way we're taught to be an artist is in Western culture and in art school is very much about like the ego and like what we have to say as individuals, whereas like an indigenous way of thinking about artwork is more about community, and I think that that it can be humbling to place yourself in a position where your work is not so much about what you yourself have to say, but more about what your community has come to realize is true and profound and beautiful. But it's also beautiful to put yourself at the service of something like that. So, like, I would say it is a worthwhile path and very rewarding.
Excellent. I know I feel inspired by this conversation. So really appreciate you coming on to our podcast this month.
I'm glad
Abraham,
I made it. I thought I wasn't going to. I'm happy that it was resolved in a way that I was able to.
yeah,
It
no,
was meant to be. It was meant to be.
It was meant to
yeah,
be.
it was meant to be at this time, and I genuinely believe that, there is a higher force that allows things like these to happen, for a bigger purpose, beyond just our own edification,
Yeah.
but it is honestly edifying to get to meet you, because I'm not kidding. I have
Which
been a
involved me
fan
sitting
of
in a hospital for 24 hours completely unnecessarily.
yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I am definitely grateful for our listeners and followers out there. Really do check out Mi Corazon Mexica on Instagram and all the other platforms. Is it Mi Corazon Mexica on Etsy as well?
It is Mi Corazón Mexica on Etsy as well. It's basically Mi Corazón Mexica on everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that it's clear to our followers out there. Mi Corazon Mexica on everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Chicome Itzcuintli. It's an honor, honestly, to meet you and to just get to hear your story. I think that's where, just like your artwork, it's a great way for us to feel more connected and in some ways humanize ourselves, right? And I will forever look forward to your posts on
Well, thank you.
Instagram. Yeah.
And I
And
hope we get to meet in person one of these days when I go to LA.
yeah, I hope so. Abraham,
We'll
do you have any parting
We'll go
shots?
dance. Well, usually have my last shots, but this time I'm like, wish you guys a speedy recovery and get the fuck away from this hospital.
I hope we do.
It was great meeting you, and see you guys.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Peace out.
Thank you. Adios.